All right. Welcome to another session of the Dawn Patrol, as coined by Larry Bond. I have to say that for copyright purposes. Um, but hey, it's been a little bit of time since we've chatted. Of course, you've been to a couple gaming conventions. I don't know if you want to just kind of just stroll into talking about that a little bit. What have you all been up to since the last we talked?
Mostly it's been China's Navy.
Okay.
Getting that out the door was an effort. A lot of the information was in Chinese, and B, a lot of it didn't match. So it took us a while to sort things out. Plus, there's just so much going on, and it changes. I mean, talk about trying to hit a moving target. Uh, and they are a major. There was a lot there that we didn't understand when we went in. And wrong Navy. There, that's better. Uh, yeah, Chris, I don't know what was harder on the China. Would you say it was the electronics or just sorting out the ship names?
Oh, they were both bad. I mean, the Zhanghu frigates, okay? How long did we talk about that?
Oh yeah, they've got. I don't think they were deliberately trying to make it hard, but
I think it was the West making it harder with all their nicknames.
yeah. Luckily, we had good information on some of the variations and managed to piece it together, but it was just a lot of work. Why is that? A great photo, nothing wrong with it, but uh, no, the Chinese actually, we had no trouble finding good candidates for cover photos for the Chinese Navy. Whatever else you might want to say about them, they have great photographers. And by the way, if you haven't seen any of their recruiting videos, which are up on YouTube, you got to watch. I like Chinese food anyways, but I was watching these videos going, yeah, sign me up. Rock music, dynamic action, sexy stuff being,
Okay.
blowing things up. It was cool. I don't know if they take
As
it.
Larry is fond of saying, color and motion.
Yeah, lots of both.
All right. Let me unshare this real quick. All right. So what other products are we getting into? What's on deck?
You want to talk about upcoming stuff, Chris?
Sure. After China's Navy, I did a Doctor Who time warp. I'm back in the 1890s, working on Immahan's Wake, um, trying to sort out armaments, which a lot of the traditional sources are wrong. Um, Trying to sort out gun arcs because there are some really funky guns in this era. But plus some other little minor things that we have to try and pull together, so people can do the Sino-Japanese War, which to this day I still don't know why. I mean, if you've played Monroe's Legacy and you've looked at the Battle of Santiago de Cuba, you saw all the assumptions we put in to give the Spanish a chance. There's precious little we can do with assumptions that give the
Right.
Chinese a chance. Um, you have no quick firing guns. You've got some of the slowest guns in our system, although the Japanese still win. They have a gun that will fire once every 30 minutes. Yeah, well.
All
So,
right.
I think Chris's main interest in this is just all the weird stuff that was
Right.
being done in this period because they had guys who were designing ships who never should have been let near a drafting board. It's clear, but it covers not only the Sino-Japanese War but several other historical skirmishes. Mike Harris has put together some great hypotheticals based on historical incidents that did or almost did occur.
and
Well, there's like 30 scenarios in it.
this will be, I would say, it's a 50-50 mix. This will include a lot of the last stuff that Bob Eldridge did for us, because a number of the scenarios were the ones that Bob put together. And then threw in my lap saying, please find all the coastal defense stuff for me. Thank you very much.
Well, besides that, we are busy on South Atlantic War. We're just about finished putting the draft together to begin the review process. And let me go into that. Just spend a couple minutes on that, just so everybody understands what we do with everything that we put out. After we create a rough draft, and it's not complete, but everything's in there, or we know what the holes have to be filled, we send it out for general review to about a dozen guys who are all part of our group, and they are all subject matter experts. It's not all the same subject, but they're all experts in some area. So they're looking at it and they give us their feedback. That takes 3 weeks, maybe as long as a month, depending upon how much stuff they find. Those corrections go in, it goes out again as a smooth. That gets hammered again. They make sure that I didn't mess up any of their corrections. And then there's usually more stuff they find. And then after the smooth, it goes out again as a galley. So everything we do has been scrubbed by these guys 3 times, in addition to the work that the author put in, whoever the designer is of that particular product. Ed Kettler has done some amazing things with South Atlantic War. This will be the 3rd edition of South Atlantic War that we're coming up with, and that'll be in time for the May 2022 anniversary of the Falklands. We're very, very lucky in that Mariano Ciaroni has agreed to review the draft for us. You've had him on this. You know how smart he is on this subject. He's got contacts and understands what's going on in the Argentine Navy better than anybody north of on our side. So we're very excited to have him give us a reality check. Of course, we haven't sent the draft to him yet, so I'm kind of, I'm not dreading it, but I really am curious to see what his reaction to it will be.
Yeah, we're hoping to do an authors symposium around the anniversary as well, so be on the lookout for that. I'll advertise it elsewhere, but yeah, that's great to hear. There was rumor that the ground combat system would be removed from that book. Is that correct rumor?
I'll take the hit on this one.
Okay.
Yes. The ground combat system is gone, and deepest apologies to everyone for taking it out, but it's not where we wanted it to be. The Falklands scenario just happened to be the first one that came up while the game was in early development, and we thought we had it locked down. And we said, good, we'll put it in the Falklands game. And the node-to-node system worked with very limited terrain and a very limited equipment set, if you will. There were only a few types of units. There were only a few types of combat happening. When we tried to broaden the system out, it broke down. That's the simplest way to say it. We went through several play tests, and I think we just couldn't make it work, and we had to move on to other things. For instance, we were still working on Harpoon at that point, trying to get it together. I would love to get a ground combat system compatible with the Trilogy system. That doesn't mean you're playing a ground combat game and a naval combat game at the same time, but if you can get a ground combat game that talks to a naval game, then all of a sudden an amphibious invasion becomes much more meaneful. The amphibs are not just targets. You're trying to keep those guys alive because that's combat power on the beach. I want something at the level where somebody who's played Africa Corps or one of the old SPI games can read the rules and 5 minutes later they're going, okay, I can run this game.
Something that complements a naval and air operational.
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't given up on it, but it's just taking a lot longer than we ever thought it would.
One of the big problems, Peter, is movement. Armor just crushed the game tests. It just completely blew it out of the water, if you will. And that's a problem. So we have to think about how we want to display the unit information. We were trying to make it almost like a map exercise. The problem is those are relatively loose things that work because you have a whole bunch of people who really understand how to run map exercises doing it. Well, you can't assume that when you're making a game.
And there's a reason why they lay hex grids over maps. And I won't lie, the effort involved in putting together a ground game is a lot higher than a naval game. You know, you've got terrain, you've got maps, and the art requirements are a lot harder.
Yeah, there is something to say for possibly just baking it into the scenarios themselves in some more light fashion, right? Like where it's applicable, right? So like if you're doing an amphibious operational scenario, just kind of like even taking what you had already done and just kind of stripping it down and just kind of baking it more into the scenario book. So I mean, Falklands, I think Malvinas is probably a good example. Now, whether, you know, obviously you're not going to bake that retro back into the book, but so how does that affect the book overall, though? Because there was a there was a pretty considerable amount of ground operations depicted in kind of a linear fashion. Did that at all cause anything as far as the flow of the book? Did you have to like kind of re-beef up some of the other scenarios, or et cetera?
What we ended up doing was, well, of course, every scenario has been revised. And the ground combat, what we asked Ed to do was turn the ground combat scenarios into narratives, so you're not losing the history. I mean, yes, the Falklands was a naval war, except when it was a ground war, and the ground combat, like the Pebble Island raid, all the other things, were part and parcel of the campaign. So they're all in there and beefed up historically by the information that Ciarone and others have provided. What we've also added, Ed Kettler's come up with a nice little operational level, basically a sortie generator for the Argentines, based on the stuff that they ran so many missions that we could develop statistically this is your chance of failing historically, aborting on takeoff, aborting after takeoff, et cetera, et cetera.
There was a wonderful thesis done by John Shields.
Yeah.
That's going to come out in a book. If you haven't seen it yet on Amazon, I've already got it pre-ordered. That was incredibly helpful in that statistical analysis that Larry was talking about, because Mr. Shields went into details. He had particularly on availability, which, quite frankly, the Argentines were struggling with.
He had a very interesting measure of effectiveness. It wasn't the number of sorties the Argentines generated; it was the number of bombs that actually struck a target.
Yeah, there was a lot of problems with fusing, at least at the beginning of the operations, right? They were kind of like not fused for the altitude that they were using it for, et cetera. But I think they kind of learned by the middle and later phases that, yeah, they had to retune it. Oddly similar to World War II U.S. operations. So
there's always a learning curve.
Yeah.
But the point is that the data is there between Shields, between Ciarone, between all these other guys. And it's just our dumb luck, heavy on the dumb, that this information comes out in time for us to incorporate it into a revised version of South Atlantic War, which will also address the 5th edition. So all of the ship stats have been beefed up and upgraded to have combat systems and the other things that they need, so they're compatible with the 5th edition rules.
We're also using South Atlantic War in parallel with doing the Commonwealth Navy supplement, because a lot of the ships for the Brits get started, in South Atlantic War. And so Peter Grining, our other editor, is already pulling together the basics for Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. That should make a fairly decent, probably one book. Supplement.
We're hoping one book.
Yeah, please.
If we have to go to 2 books like we did for Russia and the U.S., we can. editorially, it's a little bit more work, but it depends on how fat it gets. But by the way, just so everybody's clear, the information we have in the South Atlantic War will only cover the ships during the period that they're up through 1982. Whatever happened to them after 82, that's going to be in Commonwealth navies. We do not include the full listing, for instance, for all the Type 42s.
That saves us a page.
And beyond that, I don't know if we want to talk about any of the other projects we've got going on, Chris. Do we?
Just that we're still got a number of people working on other Harpoon Navy supplements. We the French Navy one's still working. We've seen a lot of tidbits from our Spanish guy Gorka, who's putting together NATO South, and NATO North. Those will be two separate publications. So he's collating a bunch of stuff. And those are the next three. Steve Jolly is working on the Latin American navies. I don't know where he is right now. But that one it's on the books. Where, I can't tell you.
Well, if Steve handed it to us right now, we couldn't do anything with it for a while anyways. The stove burners are all going.
So you think that those Navy books, those additional navies probably within the year, within 2022-ish?
I would only put any hope out for Commonwealth.
Okay.
And that's a slim one.
Okay.
It just depends on, because once we get Mahan's Wake out, we should be in smooth draft by the end of the year, I hope. And then South Atlantic War, that's going to completely occupy our time up through the first half of 2022. Throw in the 2 Sitreps, and we're pushing it.
So speaking of, without pulling too many cats out of the bag, what can we expect in the first Sitrep of the year? If there's anything
I've been collecting different topics. We base a lot of them on feedback. I'd love to run a review of that Shields book if it's out by then. Do you remember what the release date is, Chris?
Yeah, this month.
Yeah, it was supposed to be by the end of this year.
And that'll be in there. And plus, I'll run a review of this. Just to,
go ahead and show the audience, Larry. I know you're
okay. This is I bought this so you don't have to if you don't want to. This is as niche as it gets, guys. If you're into Japanese World War II naval anti-aircraft armament, this is the book. Now, if you were a modeler, for instance, on large scale stuff, 350th, maybe even 200th, you could scratch build one of these guys based on the extensive drawings he's got in here. I mean, you've got all the and some stats, which are of course what I was interested in, but this guy has really put a tremendous two guys, Joseph Edlow and Sander Kingsep, if I'm pronouncing that properly, have done a tremendous job on something nobody else will ever have to research ever again, because this has got to be the definitive work.
You might as well tell them what the gun is, Larry. You've made a bunch of teasing. Let's not leave it hanging.
Okay. The Imperial Japanese Navy 40 millimeter B type machine gun. It's a 40 millimeter. They bought a bunch of Vickers 2-pounders before the war. Actually, after World War I, because they were using this thing in the 20s. And then they ended up making their own version of it, several different versions, all ballistically the same, but different mountings. And this guy has every mounting covered in loving detail.
So not the A, the B, right?
BI is that would be pronounced B in Japanese. Not that my Japanese is worth anything. Tashi no Nihongo wa rurui desu yo.
I'm pretty sure you just made fun of me, but that's okay.
No, Peter, that would
okay. All right. Anything else about products before we slowly move on?
I can't think of anything else we want to talk about right now,
I'm
Chris.
sure there'll be questions and naggings aplenty
Well,
afterward.
let me go ahead and ask that to the YouTube crowd here. If you have any questions about products, go ahead and put it into the comments. And it's not exactly real time, but we should get it pretty quickly. I do have a set of questions from the Discord server. Pretty good amount of questions. I'll start popping them into the comment section here in a minute. But I did want to go back and kind of give you some props on Sitrep 61 real quick. I kind of want to talk about a few things here. Give me 1 second. All right, so let me share that. Hopefully that didn't just disappear. It did just disappear. All right. So let's talk through this a little bit. This honestly, I had waited a couple weeks to get it just because of timing wise, money wise, and I love this issue. It's a really good variety in it. I did want to call out, especially if people are unaware of it, and again, I've been in like World War II land for a couple months because I'm working on a Kriegspiel for it, but so I'm kind of hopping back into modern, and I did want to point out that in case other people aren't aware of it, there are the newer versions of the War Game Vault copies of the rules, and I'm really glad you pointed that out because I went back and got it because I was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Red text. So you do go over in this the forward to this the fact that was coming along, and I really like how you did that. I thought that was a great idea.
Well, thank you.
It's really nice to be able to just kind of see the changes. A couple other things here. So I'm assuming, Chris, this is the scenario that you had run at the was it Origins?
We ran it at
Yeah, we
Origins.
ran Origins and Historicon with 2 different results, which was really nice.
Okay. Without giving too much away, without giving too many spoilers away, what were the main? What did you see as the? Well, let's say so we don't give out too much, just the tactical differences. Was there any significant differences in how they approached the scenario, or just in general?
We ran this initially for some NROTC units. So this scenario has actually been played a total of 5 times, and 3 times the Americans won, twice the Iranians won. So that tells me the scenario is balanced.
Very
that
good.
you can get it to. The big thing with the Iranians is you're going to lose units. Don't be scared about it. They're all going to be martyred. Attack.
Okay.
I mean, don't be shy. For the Americans, it's don't let them get damn close to you.
Yeah. There was an issue with some of the guys who, presented with a large formation of Iranian ships, charged right in the middle of it. Not a good tactical move.
Not with an LCS, no.
You had done a talk about that scenario, had you not, Chris, at the Connections Online?
Yes, this was the basis for our distributed wargaming presentation, which largely got around how did you do a distributed game, not so much this scenario, although all the graphics, from Kevin Martell's Simplot, which is how we were using to do feedback on a virtual game. So, but yeah, this is that scenario with all the details in it. And it was in both convention games, really fun, somewhat for the Iranians because they lost small boats, like it's like the Lay's potato chip commercial. We'll just make more, and the Iranians were really going, "Why are we dying so fast?" I'm going, 1, you have no defenses. 2, you have no defenses, no ECM. Your only gun is a 50 caliber. No, you are not shooting down a Hellfire. Okay, end of discussion. And 1 hit's a kill. Okay, what more do you need to know?
I'll put a link to that talk. I think I still have the URL to that original Connections talk. So there were some good tidbits in there. Anything else about the? So did this Chinese gun correction, did that get I'm assuming that timed itself for the release of the book. And if you want to just generally talk about it, of course, everybody go get the Sitrep.
Well, it's a simple matter of, I put that. We spent a lot of time. Peter got it started, and I added to it. Had that big article on the Chinese guns in issue 60, and then our guy in China, Chang Lei, who has can read the stuff in its original Chinese, managed to noodle out the fact that there was never anything like the Type 61 100 millimeter gun that's listed by multiple sources and multiple references. And it's not a huge thing. We've corrected China's Navy. We've corrected our master annexes, of course. The most interesting thing is that it showed that even as late as the 70s, the Chinese could not copy a Russian 100 millimeter naval mount. They were taking mounts off of old ships, refurbishing them, I'm assuming, and putting them on new 1979 era frigates because they couldn't make their own 100 millimeter mount. So it just goes into the whole Chinese industrial capability, how recent it is and how far they've come. That's the big thing there.
What is anything else that surprised you during the production of the China's Navy's book? Any other just things that you learned through it that you just just aha moments?
I would say not a huge aha moment, but just a confirmation that English language sources are really pretty bad when it comes to capturing the history of Chinese naval sensors and ordnance. I mean, if you look at a lot of the Jane stuff, they barely get a page for torpedoes. They get very little. Friedman does a better job, but he's still pretty sparse in that regard. When you actually track what Russia transferred to China and then what China chose to reverse engineer, there's a lot of stuff that's missing. We got a really good idea I got from Russian sources. I have a couple of books that dealt with naval ordnance, and there were sections where they talked about what got shipped out to who. And then Chang Lei would come back and say, we didn't get that many. And I said, well, but it said the Russians say 20, for example, of a certain type of gun. He says, yeah, that was the contract. We only got 5. Oh, okay. So we were able to figure out not only what was transferred, roughly when, but with Chang Lei's help, we were able to figure out how much. And when you start pushing this all together and you compare our data to what's out there, there's a lot of really different things. We were saying the YJ-18 was limited in range when even the DoD product, and I know where it came from, had absurd ranges. Absolutely absurd. If you look at the gas tank on this missile, it's about the same size as the Russian bird. And there's a reason why it only does 220 kilometers. But what a lot of people don't realize is the YJ-18 is almost an entire meter shorter than the SSN-27. It's much smaller in the sprint body. And that's how they get 290 kilometers vice 220, is they cut the weight down. Simple design things rather than just taking a Western approach of, they can do anything, and just putting it out there. So we were able to gather a lot of data and put it together. And I guess the surprise was the totality of where English language sources were just not right.
You see so much circular reporting. You see so much where they're just cutting and pasting, especially these days where it's so easy to just cut and paste. For me, it wasn't an aha moment, but you get down in the details. There was a June 4th, 1953, Chris, 1954 deal, this huge deal.
54, 55, yeah.
Paid a tremendous amount of money for all this Russian gear. Among the gear transferred were some Project 7 Gordy class destroyers. Now, the Russians made two different versions of the Gordy. The first version had a single engine room for the entire propulsion plant. And they discovered after the first few units, well, more than a few, the Russians were turning them out like crazy. They discovered that flooding was an issue if it took a hit in the engine room. They lost the whole shebang. So they went to a much more common and proper divided engine room. You got fore and aft, and so there's a Series 1 and a Series 2. And guess which version was sold to the Chinese? They didn't give them any of the brand new Series 2. They were all War Weary Series 1s that the Russians didn't want anymore. So some of the stuff that the Chinese got was basically junk. That was something that I took out of our research.
Now, this particular Sitrep did go into maybe the biggest aha moment, which was ASW projectors.
Yeah, there you go.
We, in pulling apart the Russian in particular, and then this was validated by Chang Lei from Chinese sources, we literally had to rewrite the rules for these things because we had them separated in two tables, and then we find out that most of them should be in both tables. And they weren't as accurate as some of our initial thoughts. For example, this whole thing about a targeting sonar, just to, set up the presentation. That was why the Americans and the Brits early on, Hedgehog didn't come close to its performance expectations because the beam width of the search sonar was too big. And so they weren't necessarily aiming it properly. When you got the Q attachment for the Type 44 in particular, that only had a third the beam width. And then the Royal Navy started getting reasonable outcomes. So now we've had to tag these targeting sonars whose only job is really to point the ASW projector in the right place. And then explain to people that after Gen 4 sonars show up, they have this thing called RDT or SDT, that's rotational directional transmission or steer directional transmission, which has a narrower beam width, which is why targeting sonars go away. The mainframe can do it. It has that ability. But during World War II in particular, this really vexed the U.S. We never got to the Brit performance because we didn't have a Q attachment. We spent too much time doing scanning sonars rather than targeting sonars for the projectors. Not that scanning sonars was a bad thing. It gave us a lot better search capability. But the Brits went down a more balanced assessment, if you will, of search and attack that we kind of missed for a long time. And so all this is outlined in this particular article.
Very good. I think we will move on to, I think we had originally, we're intending also to talk about fire control changes.
Yes. We've advertised that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had done a presentation at Origins, is that correct?
Origins and Historicon.
You're welcome to just, do you want to just share the original presentation and just kind of spin through it?
Let me get to the, am I allowed to share?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay.
Just do share, and then I would It's a little weird. You have to like have it open and then you share it.
Okay, fine. We'll do that. Okay, there. Is it up?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so we'll just kind of march through this like I did at Historicon. For most of you folks, this is old news, but Harpoon 5 had an unstinking believable number of changes. One of the big changes, and perhaps one of the major change, is we put in fire control formally into the rules. There's some bits when you get into SAM engagements in Chapter 8, but it's basically defines the reaction time and how many engagements you get. We focused the rules on just the time it takes because the whole process is but ugly from a math perspective. So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about the fire control problem, which really what drives this whole thing. We'll talk limited sensor information, but it does matter. Is it active or is it passive? And oh, by the way, every sensor has error. And then we'll spend a little time talking about how we did it and why we did it that way. So we had a lot of changes in Harpoon. I'm sure everybody's realized that. We revised SAM engagements. Larry completely redid anti-aircraft fire. We've thrown in mine warfare, ballistic missile attacks, ballistic missile defense. We've done sensor modeling changes like radar ducting for is the big one, but bottom bounce for sonar. We threw that in as well. But really the biggest change, in my opinion, was the introduction of fire control. And this is, quite frankly, often overlooked because it's hard. It's hard to describe. It's hard to model. And therefore, let's just kick it out the door and leave it alone. What we went down the road was to figure out how a system determines where a contact's going to be in the future. Because that's really what fire control is about. It's about prediction. Now, it gets some pretty nasty math. Two-dimensionally, you can do it in your head or on a piece of paper. You get the 3 dimensions and it's ugly, just plain ugly. And that number crunching takes time. And the further away the target is, the more time it takes. So why did we bother? Well, one of the things Larry and I see a lot are players who seem to operate under this gross misconception, I see, therefore I can shoot. And that's not the way it works. Carl von Clausewitz told us about friction and fog of war. Those two things apply very nicely to combat systems and the fire control process. So, I'm a big fan of throwing in friction wherever I can without blowing people's minds, because they need to keep it in mind that games are a little bit more clear than you normally would have. And when you look at specs for like Phalanx or Aegis, you find that system reaction time is within that concept of how long does it take to go from starting stop to shoot. A lot of that is the fire control process. So we really do need to keep it into account. And also, this whole concept of fire control really drove research and development during the Cold War. The Russians' philosophy on quest for reach and quest for speed all delved with how do we use the fire control process or how do we simplify it? And then you look at, the American response is Aegis. How do we allow ourselves to be quicker, to engage more? And that's really what you get down to. And that's why we thought, this really needs to be here. It's a big part of the whole combat problem we had during the Cold War. So the fire control problem itself is figuring out where is somebody going. And unfortunately, war gamers are a spoiled lot. They have way too much information than they have any right to on the playing table. First of all, You guys are there because you know there's an engagement coming. I guarantee you, if you went to your gaming club, had your, your snacks and your lovely beverages first, and then have the sponsor say, "I'm sorry, there's no game today. You didn't text anybody. We'll come back next week." After you got done lynching the guy, you'd probably do something. So yeah, an engagement is coming. That's a big plus. You also often know where the other guy is. You see his movement. This god-like view of the world is something, naval admirals dream of. And then again, some people believe that if I can see him, if I've detected him, it means I can shoot now. No, not really. So what is fire control really? Well, depending upon which definition you like to use, the more modern Navy one is it's the planning, preparation, delivery on fire on an adversary ship. That's bland. I prefer the World War II version. The entire process of utilizing a ship's sensors and armaments to deliver maximum destruction in the shortest amount of time. Very distinctly different than the, Dilbertisms of today. But basically what you're looking at is you have to figure out where the guy's going to be in the future so that you can put your ordnance in the same place at the same time. So what we have is a vector analysis problem. You first need to start with, where is the target now? Where is it going? Where am I going? Where's my ship, my aircraft going? And where does my fire need to go to be able to do anything? So basically what we're really doing is figuring out a collision course with our ordnance and the bad guy. Or the good guy, take your pick, which hat are you wearing? So you need to determine the target's range and bearing from you. That sets the base work, that's our reference frame. Then you need to figure out his course. Then you need to figure out his speed. And then you need to break that speed up into its components. Speed across the line of sight shows up as bearing rate. Speed in the line of sight shows up as range rate. And oh, by the way, just like Dr. Samita and Dr. Brooks have in their books, these rates are changing over time, which just makes it really messy. So we've used the fire control process in a limited sense. And for those who've played Command at Sea and Fear God Dreadnought, this is a basically fire control table where we help you figure out how to have a intercept solution for unguided torpedoes. And this is nothing more but taking a very simple vector analysis, two-dimensional vector analysis problem to figure out how far ahead you need to shoot. Now, in the diagram below, this is from a U.S. Navy tactics manual that shows this is how you would shoot salvos. You calculate a initial intercept point and then you spread everybody else out around it. This is exactly what we do in our torpedo tables. You don't have to tell us what the setting is. We took the optimum number and then figured out what your probability of hit is with a function of range. But this stuff is how the analog computers of the time, or sometimes a handheld device, was used to determine where do I aim these things? Because if you point them at the target, you lose. They miss. So you use the target's movement vector to calculate or estimate a future position at a specific time, and then you aim your ordnance there with the goal of colliding. Now, if it's an unguided weapon, it is a collision. That's what you're looking for. If it's a guided weapon, you just got to get close enough for that seeker to take care of the slop. And that makes it a little easier. But as we all know, once you have a seeker, range starts going out. That means it gets a little sloppier. Two-dimensional problems are a bit tricky, but they can be done reasonably straightforward. You go to 3D, it is not even close. This diagram is from a U.S. Navy fire control book where it talks about all the vector inputs for anti-aircraft fire. If you want to hurt your head, you can look at the math. This is why computers were developed. because a lot of naval officers don't want to hurt their heads. So let's talk about kill chain. This is the, big thing today. I have two versions up here, the classic Navy ASW model and the Air Force model. In between are what we would call the rule segments and how they fit in. So you have sensors, okay? This does the detection, the classification, that sort of thing. You have fire control that does tracking and targeting, localization in the Navy model. And then you have the weapon systems. So when you look at this abstract analytical model, take out fire control, that little box there, and that was our earlier games. So you can see how people draw a straight line from I see, therefore I can shoot, which is why we had to put that box in. And that box basically serves as a link between sensors and the weapon systems via a set of command and control and display functions. We refer to these as combat systems in Harpoon 5. Now, the first thing I want to say is that in the Air Force model, which I'm not a real fan of because they have more steps, and if I go back, you'll see identify as miss, because the Air Force always assumes that they're shooting the right target. We know that doesn't work. So I threw that back in there. Figure out what you're bombing while you're in the process. Don't just assume the target. Well, the Air Force model target has actually more to do with figuring out what weapon you use. The Navy term we would use is weaponizing for that. So I'm going to go down more the ASW model. And the localization step really is two sub-steps. You have tracking and you have targeting. Both involve following the target's movement. Tracking is past tense. Where has he been? You're keeping track of where he has been, and you've been drawing the line with his vector. Targeting takes that a step further. You make assumptions, the guy doesn't change course, the guy doesn't change speed, and a computer and or even a manual plot can take the tracking data and turn it into a future position. The future position is the targeting data. And the best way to think about this is an area of uncertainty. A targeting solution has a smaller AOU. You have a better grasp of about where this guy's going to be. So in the Harpoon 5 terms, a poor solution is a track quality, which is why your weapon placement die roll sucks, because it's a big hole. It's a big area of uncertainty. A fair or good solution goes down the targeting quality of data. You've narrowed it down to where he could be. So when we look at our different types of sensors, the two biggest distinctions are they passive or active? And the time to solve the fire control problem depends very much on how much information you get. Active sensors give you more data. They provide range and bearing. So when you look at the active fire control diagram down there, I get 3 hits. I got a pretty good idea of where he's going. Passive sensors provide bearing only, which means you have to do a lot more massaging. Either you assume things, like the middle diagram where we have a speed strip, you get an idea, or you assume a speed, you can kind of, connect the dots. You can also do ranging maneuvers, and that's what the diagram to the right does. You see, this is a submarine passive target motion analysis type plot, and you see the course change so that we get different bearing rates that allow us to calculate roughly a range. You also sometimes get some nice little things like that yellow bar there where you have cross bearings. Because this is a lag line of sight, that defines a minimum range. That guy can be no closer than that. That's a big deal. We really like those sort of things. So you can see where a passive sensor takes more time. And you'll find that in the Harpoon 5 tables, both acoustics and for RF sensors. Now, all sensors have errors. Okay, there are limits to their accuracy, largely because of their design. Search sensors tend to have larger errors than tracking sensors because search sensors are out there to find something as fast as possible. Their beam widths tend to be longer or wider. Their pulse lengths tend to be longer. So you have more error than, say, like a tracking director or something like that. You throw in crew proficiency and what I call equipment health. If they don't take care of it, these can increase errors considerably. Now, bearing error and range error increase with range. Bearing error is worse because it just spreads out. Range error actually goes up, even though this diagram doesn't show you that, because the pulse starts deforming. It gets distorted as it goes further out. And there's also a signal to noise ratio component. If you have a very weak signal, but you can just barely pick it up, your range error tends to be higher. So you're trying to figure out where is the target within these range buckets. And the greater the sensor error, the bigger the bucket, the longer it takes to figure out where the guy's going. Now, Harpoon 5 goes back to 1955, the dawn of the cruise missile problem and SAMs, through today. Okay, I don't have to tell you guys that almost 60 years is a huge window in terms of technological advances. And we really boiled these down into 6 technology levels, largely based on processing capability. Gen 1 and 2 are analog computers. These are gears. These are cams. These are mechanical things doing the calculations. They ain't fast. Gens 3 and 4 are early digital systems. They're faster. They cover more. But we call these semi-automatic because humans still make the decisions, the final decisions, and sometimes they're still doing a fair amount of the analysis. Gens 5 and 6, we've got lots of computer power. We can crunch buckets of numbers, and these are largely automatic. Humans do very little analysis. However, they still can implement control. And that's why you will see in Harpoon 5, we have Gen 5 human and Gen 5 automatic, because it matters in terms of time. Humans are just slower. Now, how this shows up in anti-air warfare is that we throw in the time it takes to develop a fire control solution into when you can shoot. And the higher your generation, the faster you develop this. It also means that your kill assessment time gets shorter. When you combined all these in, what it means is that a higher generation allows you to get more opportunities to engage because it's taking less time to get a solution. For anti-surface warfare and anti-submarine warfare, the higher generations just means you take less time to develop that good quality fire control solution. Although you'll see rules in there that deal with sensor limitations with range. This is why shooting at second CZ is so freaking hard. It's a big box, bearing-wise and range-wise. And torpedoes can't cover all of it. That's why the Sea Lance ASW missile in the United States was canceled. We couldn't target it. It's largely why the SSN-16 went away. The Russians couldn't target it. It's all well and fine to be able to throw something that far, but if you can't hit what you're shooting at, why bother? So that's really what Larry and I went into this details about over-the-horizon targeting complexes, because it solves a very big problem, and it's a big deal in the Russian mindset as well as the Chinese mindset. So real quick, kind of what do I mean by combat systems? Well, this is my Mark 113 Mod 9 on my boat, and that's the Mark 75 position keeper in the center, and it's all got knobs and dials.
Memories.
And, your display, it's vertically oriented, but it's the same as the one on the left. It's all pictures that shows you what the bearing is, what the relative bearing is, what your course is, what the assumed course of the target is. And all these dials basically work out through gearing and cams and other such things to give you an idea of where he's going. Now, we did have a digital version. You can't see the panel. It's the one to the right. It's the Mark 78 analyzer. That was the dumbest piece of crap I ever saw. It just didn't do much.
I did have one question about all that.
Okay.
So did the systems of that time period, did they give you an indication of the probability of the...
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Nope. I mean,
not at all. Yeah, we're nice to you guys. We let you know it's a good solution. We let you, if you really want to be a demented game master, is you have them do the time and you roll the placement roll without them knowing what it is. That is closer to reality. Now, we'll get back to that aforementioned lynching that most war gamers would do. So I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a large dog and a good life insurance policy. Okay, here's a Gen 4 semi-automatic display. This is the Mark 92 system. And the red box is the fire control system. That's the displays, the weapon control, and the computers that take all the data and crunch the numbers. As you can see, everything's kind of its own little piece of kit. That's because this is a federated system. When you look at an early Aegis system, you have the Aegis system display is kind of folded in with the command and decision and weapon control system. Each console can do one or the other. It's pretty straightforward on that. But one of the nice things about Aegis is that it really better integrates these silly things called data links. And as we know, that was a phenomenal, painful evolution in Harpoon 5, was getting that all worked out. And that's because data links can transfer fire control information or just raw sensor data from one platform to another. This is a very big deal with the Russian systems. This is a very big deal with the US CEC. So what it means, though, is that the information you're passing, it takes time. So if you have really good information, but really slow time transfer, it's about the same as having really bad information transferred quickly. So what we had to come down to was this concept of, time late versus near real time versus real time. And even within real time data links, there are categories. Against slower targets, real time can give you shooting solutions like Link 16. Against fast targets, not so much. That's why the Navy developed the cooperative engagement capability to provide real-time targeting capability for surface-to-air weapons. And that's why we've got antennas, like the picture on the right, where you can see the Link 16, you can see the CEC antennas. That's what drove all this. So how did we put it into the game? War game designers tend to use two major concepts. One's called design for cause. And that is you identify the major causal factors that will drive an event and you put them into the game so that when the players follow the same stats, they get kind of the same output. Our torpedo engagement model for Cass and Fear God Dreadnought is a design for cause approach. We make you figure out the lead angle, what the Navy calls BB6. And no, I have no idea why they did that. And you fire your torpedoes down that line. And if the guy does not change course or speed, odds are your weapons are going to cross his track at about that time. Design for effect is a little different. You identify the outcome or the effect you're looking for, and you design the game mechanics such that the players get a consistent result based on the historical data you used, yeah, this is a minefield. If you grab the wrong data and you do design for effect, it can be really sloppy and ugly. As I've explained earlier, we've used both techniques within Harpoon 5. It just depends on what best fits. If it's a really complex concept, a really complex model, we typically use design for effect. In this case, since the primary outcome or the effect that we're looking for is the time it takes to achieve an accurate fire control solution, we just say a good takes this long based on your sensors and its range. That's just the quickest way to do that. It also allows us to factor in combat system generations and data links, which tend to reduce the time you need to get a firing solution. Range, environment, and what the other guy does all tend to increase that time. But this way we can get into some pretty straightforward modifiers and you don't have to do the math because, again, it's nasty, ugly, and boring. So we introduced the concept of fire control, which, by the way, was largely missing from not only our game, but just about anybody else, because we thought it was critical to properly understanding modern naval warfare. The time to generate a fire control solution is, outside of detection, perhaps the most significant factor in the engagement process. And it really helps us understand why the Soviet Union and the US did what we did. Why did the Soviets put so much into over-the-horizon targeting complexes? Why did the US spend so much time on Aegis? And we did it to combat that misconception that just because you've detected a target, it doesn't mean you can shoot it, which is why we go back to Wayne Hughes's tactical maxim. It's not attack first. It's attack effectively first. So by using time as our effect, we were able to take a very complex process and turn it into something that people could grab onto. At the same time, preserve the ability to incorporate the impact of technology, environment, and enemy actions. And remember, the enemy always gets a vote in these things into a system that's pretty straightforward. Let me kill that. And we'll leave this open for questions. Now, I just want to add one slight note on this picture here. This picture is of the USS John Young. My professor of naval science, who really allowed myself and Mike Harris, with Larry's encouragement and help, to start gaming at the NROTC. Captain Menakheim was the commissioning commanding officer of the John Young.
Has Captain Menakheim seen? I'm sure he knows what
that was my next question.
I have imprudently sent these photos to him.
That's harsh.
Very good.
Although what's harsher is when I meet, because Captain Menakheim's still in Minnesota, he's in Stillwater. We meet occasionally. He is still having a hard time wrapping his head around the fact that I'm a retired captain too.
And that you would treat another as such.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, we did have a somewhat related question from the YouTube crowd here from Primark X. For SAM fires, is there a rate of fire for launchers?
There is a rate of fire, but here's the thing that we chose to go with. Rate of fire, interestingly enough, is linked to the number of engagements. So the only decision we give you guys is one missile or two. If you have X number of engagements and you have missile launchers, you don't need rate of fire. So we took that data out because, one, even during play testing, we found it to be confusing. So we decided to go straightforward with the number of engagements.
In a way, it's logical. They would not build a system that fired so slowly that the fire control system was waiting for a missile to be ready to launch.
Well, actually,
it's not a limiter.
They did kind of do that a little bit, Larry. The early Aegis ships with the Mark 26 launchers.
Oh yeah, the Mark 26
could not keep up with Aegis.
Well, that's true. The Mark 26 Aegis pairing was early.
But we timed it so that the VLS Aegis are Gen 6 because they had by then updated software.
Yeah.
So that's how we kind of took care of that little hiccup in the modeling approach.
Okay, I'm going to continue with some Q&A if you don't
Sure,
mind us
go
going
for
over
it.
time here a little bit.
yeah.
So this is from Javi from the Discord server.
Oh no!
Here we go. Let's see. So from Javi, any chance of seeing a rules expansion to cover more strategic aspects such as satellites, radio interception, supplies, VLF comms with subs, and other such features? It kind of got cut off there, but yeah, that's where it is.
I would say there will not be dedicated rules. We can give. This is something that we could put into the Sitrep under the concept of strategic queuing, if you will, because that's what all these are about. I can see it would be useful if you're running a campaign and you want to know how to generate engagements. So we can do some of that and try and get you back into that. I'm not sure we're going to go down the supply route. I mean, I have done articles on at-sea replenishment, and I can do them, but when you look at the amount of data you need to have for fuel consumption as a function of speed, that is really ugly. I've got really good data on replenishment rates. That's easy.
Oh yeah.
But
people don't want to do. People are not interested in performing a non-combat evolution. But the way this would work at an operational level game is you would spend an operational turn, a map turn, 8 hours, for instance.
Yeah.
Performing a replenishment, during which period, you have to be in this square, and there would be other limitations on you for that. On the other hand, if you're attacked while you're replenishing, then we'd have to have some sort of table set up that said how much of it did you get before they showed up, et cetera, et cetera. So you can generate replenishment rules, and certainly if anybody wants to do that for a campaign game, we'd love to see that. We write it up in the Sitrep.
Yeah, we've been working on a strategic Harpoon. If you've copyrighted that, so be it. So we have a fan supplement that we've been kind of working on. I think that's where some of these questions come from. So it's great to hear. But I'd love to
and communications, VLF radio comms are not what I call quick. You get it, the bandwidth is, why do you think ELF is called a bell ringer? Because it takes so long to send a bit. So VLF comms really are that you can do them, but again, it's not a tactical evolution. This is telling somebody where to go. I want you to go from point A to point B. It's also has a lot of strategic implications, because for my boat, which was a ballistic missile submarine, a lot of our comms were VLF. So, but it's not telling me to attack a ship. It's telling me to launch my missiles, which would be a very bad day for a whole bunch of folks. So a lot of these communication issues, DFing, HFDF, MFDF, really move outside the tactical window. I mean, we've had this discussion on Discord and other places. Just the problems when the Russians went to burst HF comms. I mean, that just broke all our HFDF concepts. We had to redo all that. And now that you make it encrypted and you can do packet switching, getting a bearing is kind of crappy. And even at an extensive range, it's a wide fan, because your beam width expands. And you're even with SOSUS, for example, your beam was huge. Your SOSUS probability area against a loud boat is non-trivial in size.
We have included rules for things like SOSUS and the Russian RORSAT system and different things that we've published over the years. But bottom line is they're the starting point for a scenario. They're not going to happen during the scenario. The RORSAT is telling the Russians where to go. SOSUS is saying, go send an MPA over here because there may be a submarine there, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, RORSAT was supposed to be used for targeting. It didn't work too well in that regard. Now, the Russians have a new constellation that they're putting up, so we'll probably have to readdress that, especially if you want to play with some of the canceled platforms like the Project 881 Mercury SSGN firing Bolid, because the missile was theoretically supposed to get guidance update from the satellite, not from the boat.
Yeah.
So we'd have to put guidance in for you guys to be able to run that, but there will not be firm rules.
Well, it would turn into, Chris, I think it would turn into basically an area you're required. I mean, the satellite's overhead. Okay, you guys have got the window. It's from this time to this time within this area. You have to make the attack happen, or there's no attack. So again, it's not an active sensor so much as a condition that you have to satisfy in order to proceed with the scenario.
And at the same time, if you're an Oscar, it means having a butt ugly and huge antenna above the water.
There is that.
So here's another question from Angel on the Discord. Meanwhile, on Harpoon 5 has some ballistic missiles. MIRVs rules can we get more detailed rules on them and data NX on missiles, including land, sea, and air?
Okay.
You want to use MIRVs? No.
All right. First of all, this is not a ballistic missile game. Okay. We threw in ballistic missiles because of the Chinese and to some degree the Russian design to attack ships with them. So far as we know, those are single RVs. Why? Because they need to have a sensor, usually a synthetic aperture array radar, to do the final targeting to deploy the warhead. MIRVs at sea, the Russians looked at it, we looked at it, and this is with nuclear weapons, decided that it probably was not very effective. I mean, despite all the horror of nuclear weapons, at sea, it's still relatively small area of effectiveness. And if you look at the Bikini Atoll experiments, to really trash a ship, you got to be really close still. So no, we're not going to be doing MIRVs. We're not doing the land-based, strategic missile exchange. That's probably more a SAC game than what we do. What more rules would Javi like to see? Right now, you've got a couple of aircraft that can take CEC. And if you do, you treat it just like a ship. You can use AIM-120D and fire. The rules are already there. The aircraft has to have the ability to receive CEC. And that's pretty limited right now. But if it does, you can do what's called engage on remote.
Yeah, I would assume it would be the F-22 and F-35 probably have that,
right? Right. I think the F-18EF also has some abilities. But yeah, those rules really are there. We just haven't specifically called out the aircraft. But if the aircraft can receive CEC, you can use the existing rules to play them.
Okay, here's another quick one from Hobby. Going back to data links and building upon the previous point, why are some of them categorized as LPI, and what are the rules to detect them?
Okay, LPI came up specifically because of detection. And the way we're dealing with it, if it's LPI, you don't see it if you're the other guy. Largely because given the distance that you're doing intercept of data links, you're far enough away that you're not seeing the other guy. Okay. And this is one of the baselines that you see for things like passive radar systems and whatnot. If you have LPI, it does mean low probability of intercept. We do have rules in there for what an LPI signal looks like. And right now they're under radar. Well, data links are RF energy, so you can apply them to that as well. It just means it's really, really short, like you're seeing him short. So why do you care? Ah, yes.
Oh,
I was waiting for that. He keeps bringing this up. Oh, Lordy.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Is that most of these, I would say all of these, are not available in PDF. They are, at best, in old PageMaker files, which we can't use anymore.
It's worse than that, Chris. I had a request from somebody for a digital copy of Harpoon Naval Review 1994. And that's back when GDW was doing everything with paste ups and blue lines.
Yes, I know.
So, sorry, I can't help you. I'm going to have to digitize my personal copy, scan it and turn it into a PDF so I can have an electronic record of my own stuff. Yeah, I mean, I would be very reluctant to publish anything as a legacy product. Now, the stuff is out there. If you want a copy of the combat module for the to get the ground combat system, you go to eBay, find a copy of SAW2, and plunk down your cash. We would rather move forward, and I mean, we've still got a lot of legacy stuff that we want to upgrade and bring out as compatible with the 5th edition. So I think our editorial policy will be, if you like the legacy stuff, totally okay with us, but we're not actively supporting that unless you just have a quick question or something.
The amount of time it would take us to reformat and redo these things is actually
knowing that there are flaws and outdated information and everything else. It's the same reason we don't go back and upgrade the old Sitreps. There's a lot of stuff that's in there for the 3rd edition, the 4th edition of Harpoon, and I'm sorry to say we simply don't have the resources to go back and bring all that stuff up to speed.
That's that time is a cruel mistress thing. What's this? So this is your upcoming schedule?
Of course, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, so tomorrow from the Discord server, we're running Battle of Savo Island using Command at Sea. We're going to use a freestyle KS approach to it, where you're going to be isolated as divisions and only be able to use TBS, etc.
Sweet.
And, yeah.
Well, that was nice.
So in the new year, we're going to reinstantiate the Saturday morning harpoons. I love the name I came up with, of course. So that'll be a bi-weekly offering, and other GMs are going to be welcome to come in and host. So that'll be a real-time offering, And then on Sunday, January 9th, we are going to run the Corfu Challenge from Sitrep 61, which I don't know if you saw earlier in the video. It's for Dawn of the Battleship. It's a very nice scenario, and yeah, so we'll be running that with Tabletop Simulator as opposed to Simplot for that one, to give it more of a tabletop feel.
Yeah, I'll be interested in seeing how that works out.
Yeah, we'll record that one. So yeah, and just thank you very much, Chris and Larry, and thank you to everybody who's been giving all the questions, etc. Anything else either of you wanted to bring up before we signed off?
No, not to my knowledge.
Yeah,
I think we're pretty good. People, two things. One, regarding the updates, which I'm glad you like that track using the red to mark updates, Peter. That's useful feedback for me because I came up with that and Chris was okay with it. But we want to hear from the community as far as whether that's working. I mean, we know we like to tweak stuff. We like to make changes. Every time we change something, we make it better, we hope. But if you've purchased PDFs from the Wargame Vault, they're supposed to be sending you an update notice, an email, whenever we upload something, a revised version of any PDF. So you should be getting these things. They're not spam. And if someone occasionally wants to say, hey, yeah, I saw this, or I saw this update, just so we know the system's working, that would be useful. Because we put them up there, we always put out notices, but there's always 10% who don't get the word. And we want to make sure they know, everyone knows, that there are updates and improved versions of our stuff available. Because what do you say, Chris? We spend at least half of our time just updating and improving the existing stuff as well as coming out with new stuff.
Yeah, I'd say it's a good chunk of our time.
Yeah.
And part of it is just deciding whether or not it needs to be done.
Yeah.
There are things that we choose not to do simply because it's really, really in the weeds, and the unintended consequences of going to that level of detail is daunting and scary.
Yeah.
So we do triage, and we change the things that we think really do have value to the players without causing more hate and discontent, because we've just now made something that was relatively clear totally opaque.
But that doesn't rule out a Sitrep article. I mean, there are guys at different levels of knowledge, obviously, and the game is designed to teach people what modern naval warfare is like. As you get smarter, you want to know more. That's a very natural thing. We're looking for suggestions for Sitrep articles. We're looking for Sitrep articles on something that somebody thinks is a cool topic that nobody's touched.
What's the best method of getting in touch with you if somebody does want to submit?
Email, please.
The ATG email is probably the best way to get it to us.
Yeah, adtrgroup@aol.com. I try and watch Facebook, but I don't get to it as often as I can. I'm sure I've missed stuff, and I get little messages when I can.
Does the group's IO mailing list, does that copy that email by any chance? No.
Okay. I sometimes get on the group's IO list and look at things.
Right. Okay.
But that's like my fourth communication channel.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we get back to time and bandwidth. So I tend to let the group IO channel basically identify things, and then either Kevin or Brooks Rawlett will often send us a question that's not been satisfactorily answered on the group. Okay. And then I get on, or Larry gets on, and we respond.
Okay.
But
good to know.
The amount of time just to go through Facebook or all the various groups, your Discord site, I mean, I get to it maybe once a week, really, because I just, I'm got my nose in books trying to get in Mahan's Wake and South Atlantic War out.
Yeah, I need him crunching numbers, not. I mean, the IO groups, the other things are great for supporting players. I mean, users groups. How long has that been around? I check ADTR group at AOL.com every day. So that's going to be the quickest way to reach us. I check Facebook every day too, but I'm on Facebook. And my wife says, "Are you on Facebook now?" And so I'm looking at cats instead of stuff. I don't know.
All right.
You know,
Well,
just,
we'll wrap up now, and thank you very much again, and thanks to everybody that's watched and participated. So
thanks for hosting us, Peter. This has been fun. Take care.